my back's actually started twinging as though it's going to spasm today. The only thing I can blame are these fucking rolls. Alright, let's see. Attacks against... We didn't do the assessing combat group numbers. So each force that you separate into a combat group gets given its own combat number, and you put the task force, I guess, I don't know. And they're talking about the naval status board, but that's where your task forces are. So they're assigned a number. They don't tell us whether to use this, the counters, whatever. This is done secretly. You put then those numbers on the naval combat chart. The duplicate numbers. So you get the others hiding your stacks on the naval status board. Okay, and you're allowed one separate combat group. So that's why there's space for that here. Okay. Remember, the excess naval units get clumped into one. Alright, once you assign a combat group number, you have to keep it. The opponent then, once they see that number and learn what it's about, they got contact with it. Each combat group is either active, in which case it's on the battle board, distant, which is if it's going to take... If it's got a number greater... Okay, distant is if it's... Active is if it's got a combat group number and it's equal to or less than the number of the current combat round. So the first combat round, only combat group 1 is active. Distant is if it's got a higher combat group number. Pending is if it hasn't joined in the combat at all. And this is when something isn't in the interception hex yet, or if you've filled out all the combat groups and you still have excess ships, they're going to be pending. So it's important what numbers you select. So for example, if you've got a strike force that you want to definitely be involved in the combat, pretty much no matter what, you put that over in the 1 box, and it's going to be likely to be able to find the enemy, if anything finds the enemy, but it's also very much easier to find. And the tricky part comes how to assign your aircraft carriers. Because the lower a number you give them, the more they're at risk of being hit by naval units. And we'll see how this all works out. And the higher the number you give, the harder a chance they're going to have to launch their airstrikes. It's all a very clever system from my memory, but I don't remember it well enough to fully explain it. Okay. Active combat groups are going to help your search, and they're allowed to initiate fleet combat. Distant combat units can contribute to search as long as they have a carrier involved, and they only engage in fleet combat if they're attacked by an enemy active combat group. Pending combat groups take no part in the battle. They're too far away, and then they're assigned an unused combat group when they do manage to join the battle, but there has to be a number available for them. You can't combine your combat groups. Cargo stays with the combat group to which it was assigned prior to the beginning of the naval combat. Those combat groups will be considered slow, and they also get a modifier penalizing them for protecting the cargo. One search die roll is rolled for each of your friendly combat groups that has at least 10 undamaged naval factors. Another reason you don't want to make lots of combat groups is that they'll be close to that 10 naval factors, and if they take some hits, they'll stop helping your search because they're kind of like trying to hide. Pending combat groups do not contribute to search. One search die is rolled for each distant combat group that has a fast carrier in it. Okay, so you're going to be rolling a bunch of dice as you did with one of the other search things. But now that we discussed search, we're on some kind of overview level, and we'll get back to it later, but now we're talking about attacks on enemy bases for some reason. And the organization of this rulebook just, totally stumps my capability of comprehending it. Once each naval force has been divided into combat groups as required, each player decides whether or not any of the carrier-based naval air units will counter-air enemy land-based air within range of the naval force. Surviving carrier-based air units, which counter-air the land-based air units, may not do any other operations during the combat round, and they return back to their carrier kind of during a cleanup phase, let's say, instead of reading all this, because I know enough of it. After the naval combat is concluded, the status of the defending land-based air units is determined by the attacker's final counter-air combat result during that naval combat. Okay, the final counter-air result might happen in the first round of naval combat, though. And that's the tricky thing to recall. So what you're going to have to do is any flipped air, ground air, originally flipped, stays flipped. But you're going to have to keep some kind of notation to remind you how many would be flipped after the last counter-air attack on it, because it might not make sense for the naval air to keep counter-airing the same base. It might make more sense than it does in the ground combat, though. But it is possible that a final counter-air result will have happened in an earlier naval round. And those planes will still be operational, even if they were flipped over through the abort result. Carrier-based naval air units. Okay, so is this part of this rule? No, this is a new one. Allocation of available air units. Carrier-based naval air units, you're going to secretly allocate each unit to either airstrikes against enemy naval units or combat air patrol over their own combat group. So far we haven't gotten to what these markers are for. Search, cover, attack. I think they've got something to do with this. But maybe they're just a land-based air, because only land-based air can do the cover operation. Eligible land-based air are given a choice between, okay, so they're uninverted. If they're uninverted in an operational base within within range of the hex in which the naval combat is taking place, and if they haven't already been committed to ground support, defensive air support, or one of these other things, which I'm not sure why they would be doing this in the midst of land. Some of them maybe, but in the midst of a naval battle. And if they have not been forced to abort by counter-air attack by enemy carrier-based naval air in the current round. In the current round. So if you were forced to abort in the current round, you won't be able to fly this mission. So we've got to have this half-aborted status. Okay, because the carriers can counter-air the planes as they're coming off the island, or base, or whatever. And then the planes that were aborted on that round aren't going to be allowed to fight in that round. But the others slip past the carrier-based airstrike, or counter-air. Okay, and one of the missions they have is air cover from land-based, and they'll be secretly assigned to a specific friendly combat group. And this is where these come in cool. So these are going to break your AAF factors into 3 each, and those will be squadrons. So these will relate to the number of squadrons that you're committing to the air, to the naval battle, and what they're being committed to. So air cover, you assign it to a specific combat group, and you don't reveal it unless an airstrike against that combat group is made. Land-based air units which provide air cover may defend against both surprise airstrikes and non-surprise airstrikes in the current combat round. The surprise airstrikes are going to catch the planes on the carrier, but if you're doing air cover, you've already assigned forces there. Air search, if you don't commit them to air cover against enemy carrier attacks, you may help the search for enemy naval forces. NAS may not attack enemy naval forces in the same used for search. Okay. I don't know why it's called NAS. Oh, land-based NAS. Okay. Each air squadron allocated to search. One additional die roll is rolled for the search, up to a maximum of 3 extra dice. Okay, now they're also able to be allocated to the attack roll, I believe, but hey, let's not talk about that. Let's go back to the thing we were trying to talk about before, search. And you can see where it got complicated because we had to talk about these air units being assigned. Okay, actual search. After carrier-based air units have been assigned, you're going to calculate up the dice. And we've already talked about some of them. Some of them are from the combat groups, some of them from the airplanes. You can also get them from your code-breaking card. We saw these in the last stupid North Atlantic game where, I don't know what kind of card. There's search cards here, I think. Right? Or is it tactical? Tactical. Tactical gives you search. But tactical can give you other advantages as well, I think. I don't remember because every rule slips through my mind so easily. One additional die is rolled for each round of naval combat that's been resolved in a naval battle, making it more and more engaged in terms of combat groups. Okay, now the way they write this, yeah, so the first round you get 1 additional die, second round you get 2. 1 die for each friendly active combat group consisting of at least 10, yeah, we talked about this. And there may be some modifiers on here to the number of die rolls, or is this is just in chart view what's been worded, which has been worded before, very previously. Okay. Each of the dice you roll is going to match one of the potential search combat group numbers. Every combat group number whose die roll you get goes into the found box. It's actually pretty easy to find the stuff that's further back. I thought they were harder to find. Okay. If you get no search results whatsoever, the enemy is completely hidden. If you get 1, that group is found, and the owning player must reveal whether it's consists of less than 10 naval factors, if it has carriers, if it's fast or slow, and whether or not it has cargo. If more than 1 search result against the same combat group is achieved, that enemy combat group may be attacked more than once, and you have different types of attacks you can make: airstrikes, fleet combat. The total effects are going to be cumulative. So you could do 2 airstrikes against 1 combat group. Now, an airstrike, we haven't seen the definition, but I think it's launched from one of your combat groups or from your land-based stuff. Submarine attacks, which don't count against the number of times you can attack something. So again, splitting up your forces makes it harder, I think, to hit the enemy. Okay, I don't know what my time is here. Let's keep going with airstrikes here. I don't think this is going to handle airstrike combat, but who knows. Okay, once all the search die rolls are made, airstrikes are resolved as set out below. Naval air units allocated to airstrikes against enemy naval units are not compelled to attack. Okay. Airstrikes are resolved first, a surprise airstrike by carrier-based naval units, only if no friendly combat groups were found, and then all the non-surprised airstrikes by carrier-based and land-based air. Note that land-based can't do a surprise. They know where the land air is coming from. Carrier-based and land-based air units may combine to make an airstrike. I wonder what justifies something being an airstrike. Airstrikes can only be launched against found combat groups. 1 airstrike may be launched for each search result. The number of attacking air squadrons is limited by the air nationality DRM of the attacking air squadrons. Okay. That's going to be in that next section, which is the air-naval operations. But that's an interesting clue. You're only allowed to send a certain number of planes in each airstrike. So that's going to be the limitation. It's not which group is swinging at you, which is what I thought it would be. If no friendly combat groups were found, a single surprise airstrike by carrier-based naval air units against one found enemy combat group can be launched. If one or more friendly combat groups were found, you can only do non-surprise airstrikes. And returning NAS and missing carriers. Okay, if you come back and there isn't enough room for your planes, you're going to have to find someplace to land. This could be land bases if you have them within range. Can't it? No, it's got to go back to the carriers. All naval air units return to their carriers. Okay, it doesn't seem to be covering it yet. Naval air units flying combat air patrol may land on an undamaged carrier in any combat group in their naval force, including carriers in another combat group, or any air base subject to stacking limits. And the reason for this is they're fueled up flying cap, so they have a chance of, it's not guaranteed in reality, but essentially here it's going to be, they have a chance to fly out and return to a nearby land air base. But the guys who've gone out for a naval strike, they're probably coming back on vapors here, and they can only land on their own carriers. So they've got a 3 hex range they can go to. Naval air units returning from attacks, naval air units from counter-air attacks against land-based airstrikes, they can land on any undamaged carrier in any combat group in their land force. And if there are not enough of those, then they're eliminated. And we're going to stop there because I think that's all I've got for today. I'm feeling actually better coping with the rules. They were making me nauseous last night. Like, I had to go to bed early because of them. But I'm feeling a little better. So maybe we'll get through these. And I know it's useless. I know it's useless what I'm doing. It's not sinking into my brain, and it's not giving you anything of any value. But once I start something, I don't stop it, no matter how pointless it is. And this is going to become my naval rules introduction. Maybe I'll replace it, but whatever. We have a slightly different kind of header here for fleet combat. Let's start looking at it. After the airstrikes have been resolved, and we don't know how to do that yet. That wasn't gone into detail here. That's in a whole new rules section. Then we go to fleet combat, which is one active combat group, or it involves at least one active combat group. It may only be avoided if one side evades fleet combat. And the steps are set out. The active groups pair off in fleet combat. Active combat groups with the same combat group number. Okay, so if 2 groups are active, and I don't know if they had to have found each other for this, they just stumble into each other. So if I have group 1 and you have group 1, they will automatically fight each other if they're active. I don't know how you mark what's active. Well, we know what's active, so there may be some little counter to mark which round of combat we're on. Starting with the lowest numbered unpaired combat group, each active unpaired combat group then pairs off with the next highest unpaired opposing combat group. And this is where it comes down to the lower the number, the more likely you're going to blunder into each other. Then you do, what happens if you're not, okay. Once one side has all its combat groups paired, or its active combat groups paired, fleet combat is resolved for these engagements. Each active group, which either did not engage in fleet combat with an opposing active combat group, or which sank all its enemy naval units, then gets a new fleet combat with an opposing active combat group, or an opposing distant combat group that was found by a search roll. Distant is going to be one on here that hasn't been activated by the passage of time. There's no limit on the number of combat groups that can engage opposing active combat groups in fleet combat. Each fast active combat group that engages a found distant combat group in fleet combat counts towards the limit on the number of times that combat group may be attacked in that combat ground. We apparently have a rule on that, which I don't remember seeing. It's over here under search. Ah, yeah, each search result eats up one of your potential attacks on something. Now how that interacts with this, which seems to just assign active groups to battle, I'm not sure what it means, because because what's happening here is you're getting automatically paired up with people, and if you had no successful search results against that, why are you allowed to attack? I don't know. But this is actually the distant groups that are being attacked, so we're not worried about it for the automatic assignment. Okay. Okay, so distant combat groups are going to be allowed to evade if they're fast. They can only evade if a higher combat group number is available. And in order to do this, the decision whether to evade is made after the composition of the group is revealed. When it decides to evade, its combat group number is increased to the next highest available combat group number, making it further from being active, and the new number may not be in use by another friendly combat group. The opponent may not again initiate fleet combat against the evading distant group in the combat round. So, for fleet combat, you can flee if you're a distant group and you're not slow by pushing yourself further away from being active. At any time between fleet combat engagements, damaged ships can be withdrawn from a combat group that wishes to initiate or evade fleet combat so that the group doesn't have its speed reduced. I think you may need to have a fast group to chase one of these distance down. Yeah, you need to have a fast group to chase them down. Damaged ships that withdraw from a combat group that initiates combat withdraw from the naval combat at the end of the combat round. Damaged ships that withdraw from a combat group that evades fleet combat are eliminated as having been abandoned. Undamaged naval units may not withdraw from naval combat during a combat round to avoid fleet combat. This is only allowed at the end of the combat round. So you can't sacrifice slow orange-banded ships in that way. Then you resolve it on the fleet. Ooh, nice typeface error. Part of a combat group to fleet combat, although naval units may be screened from combat. There's different ship categories: capital ships, light ships. Okay, screening ships. Damaged ships, fast carriers, and destroyers carrying cargo and transports are automatically considered screened, and you can also screen other ships if you wish. The naval units that are screened are not going to be allowed to add their combat strength into fire, and they may only be fired upon by enemy heavy or light ships which have targeted them if all other friendly unscreened naval ships have first been sunk. However, undamaged cruisers that are damaged by heavy fire are screened and need not be sunk in order to attack screened naval units. Alright, the fleet combat sequence. First you pair off capital ships. Each of the capital ships are paired off in rank. The larger ships are ranked higher than the smaller. And then we have a sequence where speed is involved, etc. The ships pair off on a one-for-one basis, largest to largest. If one side has additional ships, those are going to be surplus capital ships, and they're going to be able to select targets. They can either join with another capital ship and gang up on one of the enemy capital ships, or they can fire on the light ships. Or they can hold their fire in the hope of firing on opposing screen ships. Now, this is what really excites me about this system, and why, I'm not completely abandoning this. It's a very detailed rules set for the naval combat, kind of like Le Grand Guerres, where there's a promise of something really cool. And if I remember my Rising Sun well, I enjoyed this system very nicely. Once all the capital ships have selected targets, capital ship is going to be fire is resolved using the naval attack table. So you fire individually on the enemy ships using the naval attack and what, ASFF, I don't know what those are. I think this is airstrike and fleet fire or something like that it's meant to represent. So the fleet factors are going to be at, air squadrons and fleet factors. The fleet factors are going to be added up, and that's probably pretty low on capital ship versus capital ship. You roll some dice and see how much damage you do. That damage accumulates over the course of the battle. So we have some little damage markers and we have some numbers. I don't know what they mean. They might be meant for that. And I can dig up additional counters. So ships are going to accumulate and keep damage on them through the course of the naval battle. Okay, capital ships which are targeted, enemy light ships are all considered a single target. Light ships which are sunk are just removed from the board. Cruisers which are damaged are going to be automatically screened and need not be sunk to permit fire on other screen ships. Now, you fire at the cruisers, I think, as a group, so there can only be really one that's damaged and in that position. And this is because the big ships have bigger guns. They can reach at a longer range, so they get first strike. Light ships will pair off. Once capital ship fire is resolved, any surviving undamaged opposing light ships pair off, and they go at a ratio of up to a 3-to-1 of light ship factors. If one side has more than 3 times as many light ship factors as the other, that side has surplus light ships. Those surplus light ships will either join with friendly light ships in firing at the opposing light ships, or fire one or more opposing capital ships, including those that have already been subject to capital ship fire. A single capital ship can be attacked by any number of surplus light ships. A second capital ship may only be attacked if the first capital ship is attacked by at least an equal number of surplus light ship factors as the battleship has. They could also hold their fire and aim at the screen ships. And is that an option here? Yeah, that's an option for the capital ships too. You can hold them back for the possibility of hitting screen ships. You could end up screwing up here though if you don't clear out all the screening. And then you resolve the ship fire, the light ship fire, using the naval attack tables. Now, the pairing off of light ships is weird to me, and this I kind of wish there was an example of. Because what I'm not convinced happens, I'm not convinced they split up into individual factors firing at each other. I'm also not convinced that's not what happens. Because the results might be too extreme if you fire them all at once. Okay. Fire is then resolved against any screen ships selected as targets by capital and light ships that have withheld their fire. Fire against the screen ships is permitted only if all other enemy capital and light ships, other than cruisers, have been sunk by capital ship and light ship fire. This is much more detailed than Empire of the Rising Sun, which just pairs off the fleet factors on a quick naval attack table die roll against each other. And that's why I can't be certain at all. Fire against screen ships is permitted only if you've gotten rid of the screen things. Screened named ships can be targeted individually. Screened light ships are targeted as a group. It looks like the pairing off, you do actually fire them, you do actually set them up. Now, how you arrange your ratio, I don't know. I would say the guy with the least puts all his out and the other guy can stack his ratios as he likes up to that 3-to-1. Okay, then capital ships get to fire first, and then the light ships. The capital and the light ships, which target the same screen ship, fire in sequence. Light ships select their targets after the capital ship fire is resolved. The screen ships do not fire back, which means carriers really don't have any firepower ability, which is good. After any fleet combat is resolved for the round, the submarines have a chance to attack. Each side can withdraw units from the combat. And you're going to be rolling on here. Like I said, there's modifications that are included in there. We won't worry too much about them. But some of them are important, like the 5-factor battleship is kind of a weird one. They just have bigger guns. Okay, and some of them have to do with what you're doing. So, for example, if you're part of, yeah, this isn't actually on the chart here. I don't know if it's over here. Yeah, they have if it is conducting an activity which reduces effectiveness, which is if you're protecting supply or cargo or something like that. Now, what's interesting about this is this looks like it's the old rules. The modifier here, if one of the combat groups involved, oh no, the whole combat group. Okay, fair enough. It's not the whole fleet action, which is what it used to be. And then for the effects of this, we look at the effects of damage that we've looked at before for naval damage. Okay, so let's keep going with this. Able to withdraw your naval units after a round of combat. However, if they are, they can be intercepted on their way back. And I think that'll be the same in the return to base, whatever that is talking about. That's at the conclusion of naval combat. Okay. Additional rounds. Naval battle will keep going until one side withdraws all of its forces or one side has no operational carriers and evaded fleet combat with all its units. Which means a single, from what I can see, a single little combat group, which could be up to 25 factors, can kind of slip away automatically. As long as, well, you might have to send something out to get hit first. Yeah, so I think it's going to be problematic because you're probably going to end up caught. But let's say you put your combat group out in group 6. It's not going to be active. It's intentionally, well, you wouldn't want to have it in 6 because then it can't slip away, but in 5, it's not going to be active. I think it can slip away. I think there are ways you can machinate this so that you can slip away from combat more easily than you could even back in the original Third Reich. You might be able to get out of it without any fighting at all. That's my feeling here. We'll see how it interacts in play, but that's what I'm catching here. Right. One or both sides have no one, so at the end, and any of the following situations, yeah. So if there are no carriers, okay. So if the side with no carriers can evade fleet combat, that's the way it's written. I'm not sure that's what they meant. It seems like it should be the opposite. The side with no carriers and was evaded, but the way it's written, it looks kind of bogus to me. The victor in a naval battle is determined by how the naval battle ended. Whoever withdraws lost. If you evaded the fleet combats, you lost. I don't know what happens if both sides manage that, but the side with no undamaged naval units is considered to have lost, in that order, I guess. Otherwise, it'll go multiple rounds until it does end. You can use the carrier-based naval units each round. The effects, this is in terms of, whether somebody has to return or something. After the resolution of naval combat, surviving intercepting naval forces automatically have to go to base, with the exception of if they're intercepting a patrol, in which case they get to stay out there as some kind of weird defensive patrol. Counter-intercepting naval forces can join the force that they counter-intercepted to support, if otherwise permitted to do so. Now, the otherwise permitted to do so, I think, is that they actually show up in the same hex. If they're counter-intercepting a victorious counter-intercepting a victorious intercepting force, they can operate along with that intercepting force, which may mean going back. It likely does. Cargo, if you don't have enough space to carry that cargo anymore, it's going to die. All right. What about submarine attacks? We know nothing about these. Submarines are able to intercept on their own. They can be out in patrol just like other naval units. If they're accompanying a naval force, which was I thought they couldn't be part of the same task force, but I guess they can be part of the naval force in the hex, which was that doesn't make sense. Which was intercepted by enemy naval units, or which intercept enemy naval units, may attack the enemy naval units, and that happens at some other point. Submarine interception's independent. That must be what I'm thinking of. Resolving submarine interceptions. So. You can't attack intercepting subs. You look up special rules for special places, of course, like all throughout this rule book. So we don't really have looks like they roll less dice than fast ships. They roll as one die less. If they succeed in intercepting, they must attack the enemy, and I won't remember little things like that. They must attack the enemy naval force they intercepted if able to do so. They'll return to base after attacking and are inverted for the remainder of the current player turn, in the same manner as other intercepting naval units, which means I think they stick around for multiple rounds. These are done after air and fleet combat's resolved at the option of the attacker. If there's no combat, no naval combat, the submarine attacks happen immediately upon interception after the resolution of other things. Against the single enemy combat groups, do something. Nothing. I'm not reading anything that makes any sense here. The attacks are made against single enemy combat groups. Yeah, okay, whatever. Only revealed combat groups can be attacked. It's hard to read because of the crease, so this looks like attacker to me because I can't lay the book out. Right. Submarines attack alone. They can't attack with other units. They're attacked separately. Is that each sub or each group of subs? I don't know what they mean there, Each attacking submarine, it sounds like each submarine does its own. It targets a category of defending units. If there's a single category, that category is attacked. If there are multiple categories, you roll dice to see which category. So you don't get to declare. Within each category, the attacker chooses a specific target. Light ships are attacked as a group. Only once the target is determined, you roll 2 dice on the sub-attack table, and I guess you just get a hit. Each subs all attack at the same value there, and you don't add them up or anything. And there's a bunch of modifiers here, so if you've got multiple subs against them, it looks like it's harder to attack because they're on alert about subs, for example. Torpedoes, other technological things. What about destroyers? The submarine attack die roll is reduced by 1 for every 3 destroyer factors in the attack naval force. Okay, this is probably what I saw. And this can go down to -2. If there's excess ASW, versus the number of enemy subs eligible to conduct submarine warfare in the SW box, then this changes the die roll. Now, I don't know if that changes all die rolls everywhere or just in the SW box. Again, not clear. The rules are very good at not being clear. Largely because they don't give you a good framework to hang them on. They're just a bunch of rules strung together. The attacker gets a -1 modifier on his attack die roll for each previous submarine attack. Yeah, we saw that. Okay, these are still all the modifiers here. Get bonuses for shooting up damaged ships. Code breaking can affect it. Composition of targets, I guess, affects it. I'm not sure. I don't see anything. I see no submarine defense value. What submarine defense value? Yeah, I don't know what a submarine defense value is. I don't remember seeing that in here. Is that anywhere? I don't know. attacking certain transport and stuff affects the roll. Well, I don't know where submarine defense value comes in, but I've never heard of that before, so I'll assume it's not really something that exists. And maybe we'll find out about it later while we're playing. In the effects, destroyers, some of the losses can be taken on the destroyers in the base of origin of the defending task force or combat group, i.e. they're not actually being sailed out. Well, so you can take them, destroyers taken in the base of origin, yeah, or a port through which sea supply line passed. If an attack task force or combat group continues, those destroyers, okay, so losses to destroyers, you can replace the destroyers, kind of like you would use the replacement units, the garrison units. You can go back and say, he actually killed the destroyers that aren't there. It's not really the case. What's happening is more destroyers are being funneled forward. CVs, cruisers, and name ships must be taken from the force itself. You can't go into the SW box. Oh, this didn't... Oh, you can take the destroyers from the SW box too. Sea supply lines, if they're undefended, they are disrupted if attacked by submarines. We haven't hit that roll yet, but we have a reference. And of course the cargo on the ships is covered. Next we go to the air-naval operations, which is going to be how air units kind of coordinate with naval units in battles and such on. So I think we're about halfway through the naval rules, I'd say. So another 2 hours or so. Let's see what's covered in the air-naval operations. So you can use air units to assist in a naval interception. This will increase the number of dice involved in interception. You can use them for search during a naval combat. You can use them as cap, which will help defend against enemy airstrikes during a combat. You can attack at sea. You can attack in a port. And then, of course, we have to have this timing thing. Then it doesn't tell you when anything happens because it's all generic. Okay. So at specific points, Army Air Force units, and I've said this before, break down into 3 Army Air Squadrons. And it's possible for squadrons to be sitting in the in your force pool until they collect up enough losses that you can build a full unit, I guess. What's that, I guess? I don't know. There's a lot of rolls that don't look like I need them. Okay, so the air cover operation is flown during a combat. It may be flown to protect naval units at sea engaged in any naval activity. That doesn't sound right. It can happen outside combat. You can use your air units for air cover if opposing naval attacks. Okay, and including land-based air. I don't know why it says it's outside of naval combat. This sounds... I guess if you have no boats, the defender doesn't have to commit before they're made. Before the land-based air attacks are made, he can send them in to do it. And during a naval combat, if there are fleets involved, you can also assign them. And that's air cover. What does it do? That's when you're using land-based air to defend your fleets. Combat air patrol is when you're using your carrier-based air to protect itself, and you have a limitation: no more than a third of the carrier NAS can protect their own combat group. I don't think you can send air cover. I think air cover is only ground-based air, so I don't think you can protect with cap other forces. And then outside naval combat, it's again if you're air attacked. Okay, the actual attacks. So attacks of naval units in port, blah, blah, blah. The attacker can counter-air the defending units with some of his attacking air factors. All attacking air units counter-air, huh? Oh, if they all counter-air. Then you'll just be doing the counter-air and you won't be getting a defensive support. You won't get a defensive fire coming from the ships up at the planes. If only some counter-air and the remainder attack, then there's going to be a round of combat between the attacking and defending air units, and the attacking units which engaged in counter-air cannot attack the naval units. Some of the remaining attacking air units may be able to carry out their attack on the naval units in the enemy base, depending on the defender's air combat result. I don't know what that's talking about. If none of the attacker counter-airs, then all the uninverted defending air units may make air attack rolls against the attacking air units before the air attack happens. I don't know if some are able to break off some of the remaining attacking air units, maybe it now. I seem to remember the defender can throw some of his air units, like the ones that aren't covered by the attacker's points, but that isn't from this game. That's from the A3R. And then the effects of air combat. Units that are aborted participate in subsequent rounds. Defending units that are aborted. Defending units forced to abort in the final attack against their hex are inverted for the remainder of the attacker's player turn. If the attacking air units are eliminated or forced to abort, they cannot attack the naval units in the enemy base in that round. If you beat up the number of attacking air units which counter-aired, the excess are taken from units which otherwise would have attacked the defending air units. Now, or the naval units. The air combat table. The more firepower you're throwing in there, the more you're going to shoot up. So, it doesn't really matter if the losses are first taken on the counter-airing units. You still will get some overage, so you don't have to split your forces and cover the counter-air. Used to be there were odds in this and stuff like that, I think, factored in, which was a reason you wanted to have multiple. So you might want to actually deal with the attacker's counter-air more heavily and let him bomb airplanes, but that's gone now, I guess. Inverted units cannot make a combat dice roll against attacker's air units unless the attacker elects to counter-air them. Well, I'm not sure what that means. Like, if I counter-air the hex, normally that would mean the excess flipped units do get to fight, but there doesn't seem to be a prohibition of that here. But then this says, it sounds like you only want to, let's see, nearby air units are ignored. So, yeah, I think what that's saying is you can ignore your counter-air and just send everything in, and then you'll get shot up coming in. But if you do any counter-air, you counter-air the whole pile, you bring it all up to life. That would be my interpretation. I don't know if that's what's up there, though. Attacks on naval units at sea. The defender has the option of engaging the attacker. Air squadrons flying air cover or combat air patrol may engage with an equal number of attacking air squadrons. The maximum number of defending air squadrons that can engage is limited by the air nationality DRM as follows. If it's 1 or less, it's 4 air squadrons, 2 up to 8 air squadrons, 3 up to 12 air squadrons. Some of the defending air units flying air cover or combat air patrol or over attacked naval units may be withheld. This is announced before the attacker chooses which air factors to assign to air combat. The defending air units which do not engage the attacking air units do not incur casualties from any other air combat which may occur and have no effect. The attacker has to participate with all his forces. If defending air units flying... Okay, so... Yeah, so the defender is not going to be able to use many of his units, it looks like. If there are fewer attacking air squadrons than covering air squadrons, all the attacking air squadrons must engage in air combat. This doesn't apply on a port, it looks like, although I don't know because we haven't hit the rules on ports, but it seemed from here that it was possible for the attacker to just ignore the counter air. I mean, he'll get shot up by it, but if there are fewer attacking air squadrons than covering, yeah. If there's more attacking air squadron, and I don't see where that could apply because obviously attacks on naval units at sea, it's not going to apply, but maybe somewhere else it says. Or maybe this is just extraneous words like the ones I just spoke. Okay. If there are more attacking air squadrons than covering, the attacker decides which of his squadrons will engage in air combat against the defender. The attacker's air nationality DRM is that of the air squadrons actually engaging the defender. The attacker cannot commit more air squadrons to more air squadrons to air combat than the defender. So oddly, it looks like you can't commit less or more. Air patrol and air cover are combined. Combat air patrol gets a special bonus just because these guys are coming right off the carrier and they can protect it more easily. Unless the attacker gets a surprise. Then we have a list of surprise effects. If you get a level 1 of surprise, you get, the defenders lose their bonus. If you get a level 4, one less defending, you start getting less and less defenders that can be involved. Okay, I'm tired. That's it. Okay, let's try to eke out a little bit more. Effects of air combat. Units not eliminated or forced to abort. We covered this. Air defense. Once any air combat between the attacking and defending air units is resolved, the defensive strength of the naval units consults the air defense table and rolls 2 dice, which is over here. And again, we'll have a series of modifiers. That's going to be very hard, with so much to remember in the game. What works, what doesn't. We'll have to kind of go for it. What are the results, though? Oh, no, we don't get to that yet. So, all units are valued at their air defense level. So first, CVEs are considered to be worth 3 naval factors. Ships in port, submarines, and transports are not counted. Ships sunk in port. A naval force only makes a naval defense roll if its air defense level is 1 or more. Air defense in the port. Defensive strength of ports is set out in the air defense table. Okay, so this is not modifiers. Well, maybe it is. Yeah, this is how you calculate the air defense value. So each 10 naval factors, each air defense research, each flak factor, flak are particular units that have been added to the game. This increased by things like research. The results, if you make a roll, it's going to be 2 values separated by a slash. The first value is the number of air units eliminated that are attacking, and this will be in squadrons, unless it's Army units attacking naval units in a port, in which case it's whole Army Air Force factors for some reason. The number after the slash is the number of they're just less effective, I guess. It's the number of forces that will be aborted, but kamikazes don't abort. They get to continue their attack. And we'll see kamikazes late in the game. Basically, these yellow counters count as elite Japanese naval air, but they switch to becoming kamikazes at some point in the game, basically at the Japanese player's desire. He never gets to build any elite naval units in the 39 game, and there's no prequel to it. Something I don't find happy. You can't call off an attack after air combat. You have to come in. The contents of the target are revealed. You get to see what ships there are. Then the attacking air units get to select what they're hitting. Named ships are targeted separately by attacking air units. Light ships are attacked as a group. Submarines can only be attacked if they remain on patrol during the opposing player's turn. Units under construction can be attacked by strategic bombing only. If you're then waiting for a repair box, though, you're subject to normal air attack. And then you do the air attack die rolls, which will be facing these modifiers, I guess. And that's going to be, because it's an air attack, on the naval attack table. I don't know if there's an air combat table. There's no air attack. Remember, these are hits against navies, so like and with, they can use the same table, essentially. Of course, there's this harbor attack table. That's something different, as is the Pearl Harbor surprise table, which I believe, I don't remember. Okay, and this is going to give you hits on the naval factors that you're attacking with any particular group of planes. You have to kind of try to guess how many factors you need, I guess, against each unit. Naval nationality chart. This is going to give you bonuses on Navy. I don't know why that affects this. It is going to be a modifier that reduces the air attack roll. Tougher ships, whatever. The results at sea or in port depend. Remember, in port you can, like, bottom a ship and it's not destroyed unless it gets a critical or takes another hit or something. They're cumulative and not returned until a ship returns to port, if it's at sea. Air and naval units within range of enemy land-based or carrier-based air units may leave their base to avoid an air attack after the resolution of one round of air attacks against defending air and naval units. Air attacks from patrolling enemy naval force. Naval combat. Air. What? Defending air units may move to any controlled... Yeah, so this is the withdrawal. The rules as to where you can withdraw. Land-based air can attack a naval base. This is an offensive action, I guess. During the combat phase, the result is counter-air. An air attack against enemy naval units or both as desired by the attacker. Well, I don't know if that's entirely desired by the attacker. We still haven't figured that out. Yeah, we'll see and curse it some more when we face it in reality. Okay, when you do the naval attack table, each AAF or land-based NAS is considered to be a single squadron. So the AAFs really suck on port attack. Attacking AAF take losses as air factors from the air defense roll. This is funny because you'd think, at least the portion... So it makes sense that air attack... Army attack factors wouldn't have the capability to do strikes against naval units as well as the naval dive bombers and such not do, but they should be able to split, use their counter air without being used up for that, and I don't think that's the case, but again, we're not looking too carefully here. When carriers attack a naval base or a base, when they're in patrol hex, when they're on a fast carrier mission, or during naval combat, they can do counter airs. They can't attack a hex when enemy units are based other than set up above. Mechanics. It's a counter attack and air attack against naval units or both as desired. Same rule reference. They do not split into combat groups. The attack naval force does not split into combat groups and defends as a whole. Carrier attacks against enemy base are resolved at the start of each combat round. And then there's other words that I'm not paying attention to because I'm not going to face this big a rule book without skimming. For the results, you see some other rule, and then you take the losses as determined by some other rule, which is numbered. Which probably means we've already pretty much covered that and know it. Alright, that's it for now. Okay, so we don't even know how many pages there are in this section because, they don't have the damn page numbers. Alright. I guess we're at attacks on enemy naval units at sea. No search rolls are made when land-based air attacks naval units at sea outside of naval combat. It's one strike in each hex through which it passes. The size of the airstrikes is based on the air nationality DRM, how many squadrons you can actually send into play. Whether or not that counts against cap or anything, I'm not sure. That's kind of not accounted for up here. Carrier-based airstrikes, these happen only in naval combat. The units can combine from multiple groups. Naval air from a combat group may split. You're allowed one attack per round. It's possible, if none of your combat groups are found by the opponent, that you get a surprise airstrike. You only get to choose one of these. It's the first airstrike resolved in the round. You have to determine what the surprise level is. You roll a die roll, check the surprise table, which I'm sure is duplicated somewhere here. Yeah, because otherwise that would really suck. There's some modifiers on it based on how many search results you got. The effects are listed here. They can get pretty bad to the point where there's no defending air squadrons that get to engage you. Air attacks which damage a naval ship will trigger a critical hit die roll. That's about as bad as it gets. There's a reduction in air squadrons. Possibility of a DRM to your attack die roll. DRM in air combat. Now I believe all of these effects are cumulative, yeah. Land-based airstrikes may be made at any time. During naval combat, it can happen at any time during a naval activity, including during naval combat. Well, that's rather weird. The at any time, that makes it sound like you can just attack outside of the normal realm of naval combat. Hey! It looks like we're almost done. I'm not going to worry about strategic warfare. That's not going to apply to this scenario, thank God. We had to fiddle through that in the North Atlantic scenario. Air from different bases can combine. Land-based air can't get surprised. Now, during a naval combat, these are resolved at a specific time, not at any time, as they say. One attack per combat round, one air sortie per hex. But then there's additional air sorties in each hex as it's moving. That's outside of naval combat, okay. In naval combat, it's happening in the rounds of combat. Air attack, I assume, you know, when I read things that don't make sense, I have to try to ignore them. Air may attack more than once, more than one naval force. Can attack after a naval interception. When it's handled against supply lines, it's handled the same as against naval units. You know what we don't have? We haven't hit the disruption of a supply line, how it's actually disrupted. See, supply lines come in 30.37. We didn't really pay attention to these in Barbarossa. Okay, so they're disrupted if they take any damage, or if the opponent, or if the player who's got it tries to get out of the way. So that's it. And this has gone, what, you know, 3 hours, you know. But Maybe after I play this and get some of the base game, I'll replace this one. This is all I got right now for the naval rules. It's going to have to do. I'm going to have to fight my way through them during this scenario. And if you listen to the whole thing, I'm truly sorry.